Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending today's event. My name is Patrick Weber, and I'm Chief of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau at the FCC. Today, we launch the Reassigned Numbers Database, or RND. This database is a key part of the Commission's multi-pronged approach to combating illegal and unwanted calls. By checking the database first, callers can avoid calling a number that has been reassigned to a new subscriber who is not given consent to be called, thereby helping callers and consumers alike. So it is with great pleasure that I announce to you today that after years of planning and preparation, the Reassigned Numbers database is fully operational. I want to give you a brief history of how we got here. In December of 2018, the FCC released a second report and order on advanced methods to target and eliminate unlawful robocalls. In that order, the Commission addressed the problem of unwanted calls to consumers with numbers reassigned from a previous consumer by establishing a single comprehensive Reassigned Numbers database. After a procurement, the Commission selected SomosGov to be the RND administrator. The administrator has spent the last 11 months developing and testing the RND in coordination with Commission staff. Over the summer, the administrator conducted a very successful beta test of the database. 131 callers and caller agents participated in the beta test, entering 213,627,951 queries and possibly preventing over 15 million calls to the wrong number. A few weeks ago, small service providers began reporting their disconnected numbers to the administrator. So with all service providers now reporting, the data set is complete. The database already contains over 152 million telephone numbers and will continue to grow each month as providers fulfill their ongoing reporting obligations. During this afternoon's event, you will hear from Karen Schroeder of CGB's Consumer Policy Division, who will explain in more detail what the RND does and why it is so important to stopping unwanted calls. You will also hear from the RND administrator on how to register for and subscribe to the RND, along with a demonstration of how to query the database. A few of the beta test participants will also describe their experience using the database. And near the end of our program, FCC staff and the administrator will answer your questions about the database. To submit questions, please send an email to rndwebinar@fcc.gov. Within the Commission, the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau worked very closely with the Wireline Competition Bureau to make this database a reality, along with many others. I would now like to introduce Wireline Competition Bureau Chief Chris Monteith to give remarks.
Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here to recognize and applaud the culmination of many years of work on the part of the Commission. The Wireline Competition Bureau has a long history of overseeing numbering administration. When the Commission authorized the creation of the Reassigned Numbers database, it sought to achieve operational and cost efficiencies by merging the administration of the Reassigned Numbers database with the already consolidated North American Numbering Plan Administrator and Pooling Administrator functions under a single contract and a single administrator. CGB has worked closely with WCB to make sure that that can happen. My thanks to the North American Numbering Council and its working groups for developing the technical requirements for the consolidated administrator and the ongoing oversight of all of our numbering administrators. As Patrick mentioned, the Reassigned Numbers database is an important part of the Commission's ongoing multi-pronged efforts to combat illegal and unwanted calls. As we all know, there is no silver bullet that will solve this problem. Thus, the FCC is cracking down on illegal calls in a multitude of ways. The Reassigned Numbers database is one such way. Using the Reassigned Numbers database, callers can make sure that from the outset, they are dialing the right number to reach the intended recipient of the call. As an IP call transverses the networks, it will be subject to the stir-shaken caller ID authentication framework. Caller ID authentication technology enables subscribers to trust that callers are who they say they are, reducing the effectiveness of fraudulently spoofed calls. This technology is critical to protecting Americans from scams using caller ID and will allow voice service providers to provide helpful information to their consumers about which calls to answer. The Reassigned Numbers database, or RND, should not be confused with the robocall mitigation database, or RMD. The Commission requires all voice service providers to file certifications regarding their efforts to fight illegal robocalls on their networks in the RMD. Voice service providers must certify that they have implemented the stir-shaken caller ID authentication framework unless they are subject to an extension, in which case they must certify that they have implemented detailed robocall mitigation requirements. Many voice service providers implement caller ID authentication throughout their networks. The Commission's caller ID authentication efforts, call blocking policies, enforcement, the RMD, and the RND are all important parts of our multi-pronged approach to fighting the scourge of illegal robocalls. I want to thank the staff across the agency that's worked so hard on these efforts. Their work is vitally important. With that, I'd like to introduce Karen Schroeder from CGB's Consumer Policy Division to provide an overview of the RND. Karen?
Thank you, Chris. As Patrick mentioned, the Commission released a second report and order on advanced methods to target and eliminate unlawful robocalls back in December of 2018. In the Reassigned Numbers database order, the Commission addressed the problem of unwanted calls to consumers with numbers reassigned from a previous consumer by establishing a single, comprehensive Reassigned Numbers database. Next slide, please. The R&D order established how the R&D will function, including how the data is populated and how the system will be used. The R&D system securely houses U.S. geographic and toll-free numbers that have been permanently disconnected and thus possibly reassigned, and the date of the most recent permanent disconnection of each of those numbers. The FCC awarded the contract to develop and administer the R&D to Somos.gov, and work began in December of 2020. As of April 15th of this year, service providers must report permanent disconnections to the R&D on the 15th of each month. Small business service providers were given an additional 6 months until October 15th, just 2 weeks ago, to comply. The Commission defined small business service providers as those providers with 100,000 or fewer domestic retail subscribers. Service providers have been required to maintain records of the most recent date that each phone number allocated or ported to the provider was permanently disconnected since July 27th of last year, or January 27th of this year for small business service providers. As of October 15th, all service providers are now reporting information to the database, and there are 152,738,232 telephone numbers in the R&D. and this number will continue to grow over time. As of July 27th of 2020, all service providers have been required to age telephone numbers for at least 45 days after permanent disconnection prior to reassignment. This aging requirement gives the number time to be reported to the database in the monthly report from the service providers before it's reassigned to a new consumer. What people ask quite often is using the R&D mandatory? No. While service providers must report permanently disconnected to the R&D, it's mandatory for them. Callers are not required to use the R&D. It is not mandatory for callers. So then who would use it and why? Well, all entities making outgoing calls or texts can probably benefit from using the R&D. For example, pharmacies, large chains or local stores, retailers, again, large chains to local stores, financial institutions such as banks and debt collectors, healthcare providers such as doctors, dentists, and hospitals, religious organizations, hair and nail salons, and anyone else who makes outbound calls using an artificial or pre-recorded voice or an auto dialer, or really any outbound calls. Callers that use the R&D can experience benefits by not calling the wrong number when trying to reach a consumer. Calling the wrong number is a waste of time and money, and annoying people with unwanted calls can tarnish a brand reputation. In addition, the R&D can help callers that are subject to them comply with regulatory requirements, such as the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. So callers and or their agents will check the R&D to determine whether a telephone number has been permanently disconnected from the consumer they intend to reach, thus allowing them to avoid calling consumers with potentially reassigned numbers who may not want to receive the call, and to comply with regulatory requirements. One significant advantage of the R&D is that it makes the caller eligible for a safe harbor from certain kinds of TCPA liability if certain conditions are met. Let's take a look at the specifics of the safe harbor. The FCC defined a safe harbor from TCPA liability for a caller that can prove that it, 1, obtained consent from the intended call recipient, 2, checked the most current version of the database prior to calling the number to verify that the number had not been permanently disconnected and thus possibly reassigned after the date the caller obtained consent or the date the caller was reasonably certain the consumer could still be reached at that number. And 3, received from the database a query response of no, indicating the number has not been permanently disconnected and thus not reassigned in that time. That was incorrect. So the safe harbor applies when a caller obtains consent, checked the R&D properly, was told to go ahead with the call, and still reached the wrong person due to the number having been reassigned. It is not a complete waiver of all TCPA requirements, and remember, the caller bears the burden of proof. One common misconception about the R&D is that it is something callers can download, like they do with the FTC's Do Not Call registry. So I just wanted to say here that unlike the Do Not Call registry, the R&D is not a download. The R&D uses a query-based system. Any query to the R&D must consist of both a telephone number and a date of consent. The R&D will respond with yes, no, or no data in response to the question, has this telephone number been permanently disconnected after the date of consent? So what does that mean exactly? Well, yes means the number has been disconnected and thus possibly reassigned after the date provided, and the caller should not call that number because you won't reach the person you were looking for there. The only situation where you would call that number is if you have separate consent from the current holder of the number. No means the number has not been disconnected or reassigned, and the caller can place the call, provided they have obtained consent from the consumer if consent is required under the TCPA. No data means the system just can't tell. It indicates the queried number is not contained in the database, and the date provided in the query is before the date all providers were required to report disconnected numbers to the R&D. So this database has no way to tell if the number could have been disconnected and reassigned in that time period after the date of consent, but before the R&D began tracking permanently disconnected numbers. So let's talk more about the date of consent. The date of consent is either the date that the caller obtained consent from the consumer to call the number, or a later date when the caller could be reasonably certain that the consumer could still be reached at that number. So for example, caller might select the date on which it last spoke to the consumer at that number. A caller might select the date the consumer last updated her contact information with that number. Or a caller might select the obvious, the date when they obtained consent from the consumer to call the number. Callers will get more actionable yes and no responses, that is, fewer no data responses, if they use a date of consent after October 15th, 2021, which is when the smaller providers began reporting, giving the R&D a complete data set. So given all that, let's talk about how to get to the R&D. The R&D is accessible via a web-based platform at www.reassigned.us. Callers and their agents may register and query the R&D. Queries may be made one telephone number at a time or via a batch process using SFTP or API. And please see the slide here for additional ways to find out more about the R&D, and we'll be telling you more about it as we move forward with this. And don't forget, if you have any questions about anything I've just said, please send an email to rndwebinar@fcc.gov, and we'll try to answer it later on during the Q&A portion of the webinar, or we'll get back to you after the event. Now, the Reassigned Numbers Database Administrator will provide an overview of the R&D website at www.reassigned.us.
Hello, welcome to this video tutorial, Getting to Know the R&D website. During this session, you will learn where to find the information you need to understand everything about the R&D, from how the R&D came about, to finding video tutorials, to logging into the system. Let's get started. The top navigation of the R&D website provides you with access to nearly everything you will need to successfully connect with confidence through the R&D. The About page will provide all the information you need to understand how the R&D came about. The Submit page provides service providers and service provider agents with information about registering and submitting disconnect data. Likewise, the Query page provides callers and caller agents with information about registering and querying disconnect data. Under Resources, you will find a slew of helpful information, including but not limited to user guides, video tutorials, and frequently asked questions. Within Support, you will find contact information for the R&D administrators, as well as other information that you will find useful. The Pricing page provides everything you will need to know about query subscription plans available for the R&D. Under Agents, you will be able to find an agent, either for a caller or a service provider, as well as learn about how to become an agent. The FCC page provides information from the FCC, including orders and public notices. It also provides a direct link to the FCC's R&D page that has a wealth of additional information. From the top navigation, you can also access the login for this web-based system. There is also search functionality if you aren't certain which page will have the information that you need. The bottom navigation of the R&D website also provides key information, including the R&D privacy policy, the R&D neutrality statement, additional access to the support page, access to a feedback form to share recommendations to improve the R&D experience, the R&D terms of use policy, a sitemap for a different way to navigate the website, and all the handles to follow the R&D on social media: Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Vimeo. We won't show you all of the pages during this tutorial, but we will highlight the areas that we think are critical to be successful. On the About page, you'll find interesting information about how the R&D came to be, but more importantly, you can learn how the R&D query responses apply to the FCC's Telephone Consumer Protection Act Safe Harbor. No responses indicate that the telephone number queried has likely not been reassigned since the date of consent provided, meaning Safe Harbor may apply if you call this number and reach someone other than your customer. The query page has two tabs that are relevant to callers and caller agents. The first tab provides information on the four-step registration process for callers and caller agents to register and gain access to the R&D. The second tab on the query page details the multiple ways callers and caller agents may query disconnect data, as well as the information that is needed in order to conduct a query. Please note, user guides are available to set up API and SFTP querying. However, you will not be able to start that process until your registration is complete. With everything you need to know about R&D subscription pricing can be found on the pricing page. Here, you can also learn about the options available to increase the number of queries if you find your account is running low. The Resources tab opens a plethora of information, including user guides for all types of users within the R&D, webinars, video tutorials, and other video-based information like the video you're watching now. There is currently nothing on the R&D reports page. However, in the future, you'll find annual reports and other public reports as they are generated. The change orders page is also empty right now. In the future, this will include FCC-approved change orders to the R&D system. Not familiar with the telecom industry? In the industry links page, you can gain access to regulatory standards and groups such as the FCC, NANCI, and ADIS. Who doesn't love a good FAQ page? Lots to learn from commonly asked questions on this page for sure. The R&D notifications page is also empty at this time. In the future, it will include notifications of system maintenance windows and outages. And last but by no means least is the acronym list page that will help those new to the telecom space understand our alphabet soup of terms. Not only does the support page provide the contact information for the R&D administration support team, you can also find the support team's hours of operation and holiday schedule. And for service providers and service provider agents, the submission dates for reporting disconnected data. Whether you're a caller or a service provider, using an agent to handle your R&D related interactions may be appealing. Although the R&D doesn't endorse any particular agent, we do make it easy to find an agent by allowing them to display their information here. No one is required to use an agent to conduct business with the R&D. It's just an option for those who want the convenience an agent may provide. And please note, agents are not required to list with the R&D, so please do not consider this list to be exhaustive. Interested in becoming an agent? All the information you need is on the Becoming an Agent page. Don't forget, as an agent, you are required to provide a letter of authorization in order to list a company as a client, in order to submit or query on their behalf. Letter of authorization templates can be found here. Now that you know where to find everything on the R&D website to register and query with confidence, remember to bookmark this page, as you will be coming back here to log in to the system and access the database. We hope you found this website overview helpful and are ready to connect with confidence with the R&D. In our next module of the series, we will walk you through the registration process for callers and caller agents.
Thank you for that great overview of the R&D website. The R&D is live now, so you can go to reassigned.us to see the website for yourself at any time. As we've mentioned, from July to September, the administrator conducted a beta test. Registered callers queried the database and provided feedback to the administrator prior to the system's launch. One of the beta test participants shared these comments with us. This is from Holly Pallas, CEO of Nexa Group. Nexa is a nationwide marketing data and compliance company that serves the energy and utility industry. Holly says, our focus is helping companies improve consumer call experiences while protecting their brand. We do this by flagging telephone numbers that are no longer associated with their customers, so they can remain TCPA compliant with any customer contact programs. We signed on for the R&D beta to gain better insight into the coverage, process, and output that we would be able to provide our clients as query agents. Our clients are focused on offering proactive and relevant communications to their customers so they can provide the best possible customer service. As part of that effort, we are utilizing the R&D to ensure customers who are contacted via telephone in programs such as renewal, customer service notifications, and offers for value-added services have not disconnected and reassigned their numbers, thus avoiding calling the wrong person. We understand that high value of safe harbor that the R&D offers and are working with our clients to integrate this process into their current programs. That's great feedback on the value of the R&D to the energy and utility industry. Thanks. Next, the database administrator will demonstrate how users can register for the R&D.
Hello, welcome to this video tutorial where we will review registering as a caller or caller agent within the Reassigned Numbers database. During this session, you will learn the 4-step process to register with the R&D in order to query the telephone numbers you or your clients call or text in the course of conducting business, whether it be reminders and notifications to payment requests and add-on sales. The R&D is the only comprehensive database that houses disconnect data from all service providers within North America. Let's get started. To access the R&D, you would start at our website, www.reassigned.us. This slide is a screenshot of our homepage where there are 2 gold boxes showing 2 options for you to get to our published instructions for registering as a caller or a caller agent. If you are wondering if you need to register as a caller or caller agent, consider who you are querying on behalf of. Callers will query the database on their own behalf for calls and texts that they will send to their consumers. Callers will log into the R&D directly to query the telephone numbers of their consumers. They will enter the consent date they have on file to contact their customers and will receive the query results and download and retain those reports for compliance records retention. Caller agents may query on their own behalf, but more likely will query on behalf of clients who contact consumers on a regular basis. Agents will gather customer telephone numbers and consent dates from their clients. They will then conduct the query and retrieve and retain the results. A benefit of using an agent may be to obtain a lower per query rate that an agent may subscribe to because of the larger quantity of queries that they will conduct. Agents may list themselves on the R&D website. However, the R&D administrator does not endorse any particular agent, and signing with an agent is not required to access the R&D. To register with the R&D, there are 4 basic steps that will be covered more in depth in the following slides. The first step, you will need to request registration access. Second, you will identify a primary contact for the account. Third, after successful registration, you will need to establish a passcode and multi-factor authentication. The last step is to log into your account, at which point callers will add additional users and caller agents may also add clients. To request a login, send an email to support@reassigned.us, indicating the type of registrant, either caller or caller agent. There is only one primary contact per company during registration. The primary contact is responsible for registering the company's access to the R&D, and once registered, can invite additional users, establish SFTP or API credentials, and manage their company's profile. Following registration, the primary contact role can be transferred to a different user, or another user may be elevated to this role within the company account. Once you have received your customized registration URL sent to your email address, you'll be prompted to fill out an online registration form where you will enter the company contact information as the primary contact. When filling out the registration, an authorizer contact is also required. The authorizer must be someone from the same company for the R&D to verify the primary contact works for that registering company. Reviewing and agreeing to both the R&D terms of service and terms of use is required to submit the registration application, as well as successful completion of reCAPTCHA. Once the registration is approved, you will receive a confirmation email containing a temporary password to use to establish a new password for login. An extra layer of security, you will then be prompted to set up multi-factor authentication using Google Authenticator's mobile or web-based application. After successfully logging into the new account, the primary contact will be able to invite additional users from their company. Caller agents will also be able to upload letters of authorization for their clients to add clients to their account. Templates for the LOA are available on our website under Agent on the top navigation menu, then Become an Agent from the dropdown. We hope you found this registration overview helpful and are ready to connect with confidence with the R&D. In our next module of the series, we will walk you through the R&D beta test period and how that helped us inform not only system improvements and enhancements for general availability, but also helped us to determine our interim pricing.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Once again, if you have any questions or problems registering, please contact the R&D administrator at support@reassigned.us. Another beta tester provided this feedback about the usefulness of the R&D. This one is from Frank Regano, CEO of Interactive Marketing Solutions Corporation. He writes, "In various ways, we help hundreds of clients comply with the rules of the TCPA. IMS is now registered with the FCC's designated R&D provider as a caller agent to help client companies avoid making misdirected telephone calls due to reassigned telephone numbers. Each month, we will be working with both companies and the R&D to identify telephone numbers that will no longer reach the intended party. Not only will this keep our clients in compliance with the TCPA, but it will also improve the efficiency and effectiveness of their calling operation. A win-win for everyone." Thanks, Frank. The R&D is a great tool for TCPA compliance. Next, we will hear from the administrator about this summer's beta test and the tiered pricing structure of the R&D.
Hello, welcome to this video tutorial where we will share information about the R&D beta test period and how that helped us inform not only system improvements and enhancements for general availability, but also helped us to determine our interim pricing. Let's dive in. From July 1st through September 30th of 2021, we held a beta test period for callers and caller agents to allow them to use the R&D free of charge. We had a vast array of testers from very small regional companies to large Fortune 500 companies. Overall, 130 companies participated, and through that participation, initiated over 213 million telephone number queries. In analyzing those transactions, we believe over 15 million potentially unintended nuisance calls were avoided. Throughout the beta test period, we registered callers and caller agents, educated them on how to use the system, and received continual feedback from beta test participants. As a result of that feedback, a number of system enhancements were added, including the addition of a consent date field to the user's file format for querying, production of a timestamp in the query results file, allowance of the caller or caller agent to add a record ID to each telephone number for their tracking purposes, an ability to maintain the query date format from the query to the query results report, and enhancements for the full automation of query results so that callers could obtain their report without logging into the system. In addition, we have a release planned which will increase the maximum file query size for callers and caller agents from 250,000 telephone numbers to 1 million. All in all, from a usability perspective, we believe the beta test was a great success. And in addition to system enhancements, The beta test period helped us understand potential usage trends to set the interim subscriptions and pricing. We arrived at our interim pricing based on the initial requirement that no query should cost more than a penny. We then used market research and feedback from the beta test period to inform not only on subscription tiers, but their associated pricing. What we have arrived at was a pricing model that offers flexibility based on caller needs, while offering steep discounts from the base price for larger users. As a reminder for those not familiar, the R&D business model, a pay-to-play subscription-based system with tiered pricing, was set forth in the FCC's Reassigned Numbers database order in December 2018. In order to begin querying the R&D, you must select a subscription and pay through the portal via credit card or ACH. Please note, for the time being, we will be offering 3 subscription term options: monthly, 3-month, and 6-month. Eventually, we will offer annual subscription options. If you exhaust your queries before the end of the subscription term, don't worry, there are 3 options available to help fill the gaps in your querying needs. First, you can buy a new subscription. A new subscription would begin a new term, either 1 month, 3-month, or 6-month, depending on the option you select. Second, you can upgrade to a higher tier with more allotted queries. In upgrading your tier, you can keep the original subscription term the same. Third, you can top off the subscription. You can buy as many top-offs as you need to get you through. We hope you found this beta and interim pricing overview helpful and are ready to connect with confidence with the R&D. In our next module of the series, we will walk you through how to select and pay for your subscription and how to start querying the database.
Thank you. That was a very helpful overview of the beta test and the pricing model. As you can see, the administrator was very responsive to user feedback during the beta test, and we expect that to continue now that the R&D is operational. I'd like to mention that the amounts you just saw are considered interim usage charges. The Commission issued a public notice on October 1st that details the interim pricing and confirmed that the administrator may adjust the usage charges, including the number of tiers, the number of queries in the tiers, and the charge for each tier on a monthly basis with approval of the Commission. The administrator will post notice of changes to the interim usage charges on the R&D website at www.reassigned.us 2 weeks before they go into effect. Registered subscribers will receive notice of changes to the interim usage charges before their subscription ends as part of the R&D renewal notification process. We anticipate that the Commission may commence a proceeding to establish a more permanent rate structure that would go into effect no sooner than January 1st, 2023. Next, we will hear from another beta test participant before the administrator provides a demonstration of how to subscribe to and use the database. This is from Contact Center Compliance, which says, CCC has been the leader in the compliance industry for 21 years with the sole mission of providing our clients comprehensive cloud-based solutions to mitigate liability and maintain a complete compliance platform. In this increasingly dynamic and complex regulatory environment, CCC helps to protect our clients from devastating fines and damages to their brand with our vast array of solutions, including reassigned phone number identification. We applaud the FCC for undertaking the task of mandating carriers to begin reporting on the changes in ownership of phone numbers. Because of this, there is now access to an authoritative FCC R&D database that provides another layer of accuracy and protection for clients to prevent inadvertent contact that may result in liability. CCC does not take the position that one database nor program will resolve all challenges. However, adding a government-designated solution backed by official authoritative data is a big step in the right direction, and we applaud the efforts that have gone into this program from both government and private business alike. CCC is proud to be a caller agent of the Reassigned Numbers database and believes this additional accuracy helps the call center industry avoid calling the wrong consumers and reach more of the right contacts. We are looking forward to helping our clients with their integrations to the R&D program. Thanks, that's great feedback and a good point that the R&D is not a silver bullet to stop all illegal robocalls, but it is an important step to stop calls inadvertently made to a number that has been reassigned. Now, let's take a look at a demonstration of the R&D itself.
Hello, welcome to this video tutorial, Subscription Selection and Querying, where we will demonstrate how to select a subscription in the R&D and query telephone numbers in the database to start realizing the benefits of using the R&D today. Let's get started. So the first step to querying the R&D is to go to our homepage at www.reassigned.us and click on the login button. Before logging into the system, I'm just going to take a few minutes to walk through some of the screen grabs to familiarize you with a few key activities with respect to selecting your query subscription and setting up your billing account. Within the R&D, you'll be able to choose from several subscription options based on the length of the subscription and the total number of transactions that are available for each subscription length. More information about the subscription plans can be found on our website, Reassigned.us, under the Pricing tab. Select the Subscribe button for the subscription plan that works best for you. You will then be prompted to enter your billing information. Following the subscription purchase, you'll have access to a subscription dashboard that will provide the subscription details, including the plan length, size, and end date. You'll also be able to see if you selected auto renewal, and if you didn't, you want to make sure the end date, that you know the end date, in order to ensure you return to renew your subscription before your R&D access is disrupted. Lastly, the summary will provide a tally comparing the number of queries available within the subscription and the number of queries remaining. Each query is deducted from the total queries available. If you find you are running low on queries, you have some options. You're able to manage your subscription in a variety of ways. You may update your billing information, purchase a new subscription, or top off the available subscriptions if you're running low on available queries. More information about managing your subscription can be found under the Pricing tab on our website. And now I'm going to head into the system. And please bear with me a moment as I move from the presentation to the system. I'm going to log in, and you will see when I get to the login screen, I'll first do a password that I had created, and then I will get to a multi-factored authentication screen. I put the password in. You'll notice the multi-factor authentication. So you need to enter the verification code from your Authenticator app to complete the login. The Google Authenticator is typically what is used. You can either download the extension to your browser, or you can download the app to your mobile device. It's a personal preference or a company corporate decision. The multi-factor authentication is an additional security step that's required by FSMA to protect not only government information and operations, but your data. So I use the app on the phone just because I am used to it. And it's always going to be 6 digits. All right, so we have logged in to the home page. In this case, it is a caller agent user type. Before I can take any activity, I am going to have to subscribe to a plan. I'll move over here. You will notice one thing about logging into the R&D, the date of the most recent R&D database refresh, the date and time will always be listed on the top right-hand corner when logging in. So for the caller agent, there's the profile information, the usual profile information. This is a caller agent. So in the company information, company ID of the actual caller agent, and in this case, this agent does have a client. This is important to note because the company ID is what will be used when the caller agent does any queries or uploads files, bulk files on queries for this agent. Also in the profile, there's a users section. This is the area where the primary contact invites additional users. Subscription, this is the subscription dashboard. Once we actually subscribe to a plan, this will change into a dashboard. Notifications, these are system education updates, different types of notifications. These are defaulted to be opted into. The system availability cannot be unchecked, but the rest of them can. Notifications, API credentials and SFTP credentials also available once registered. And the API credentials, also the user guide is available through the profile. So back to querying the profile. If we were to try to start querying the database right off the bat, the user will be presented with the unable to query TN data because billing subscription is inactive or the query limit has been reached. The R&D, two things. The R&D will notify the user if they have a subscription and have either used 75% of their available queries. It will also notify them when they are out of queries. In this case, we just haven't set up a subscription. So I am going to go back and set up a subscription. In this case, I'm using a small, and you'll notice everything that you need, including the auto renew, as we noted in the earlier slide, will be presented. I am going to pick the 1 month, because that's what I picked. Proceed to checkout. I'm going to add the information. And next, you'll have the ability to use credit card or ACH. I'm going to use credit card in my case. Go back. Valid credit card. Next. And I agree. Subscribe. And once you get to this window, you can close and you'll notice there's a countdown. And once the countdown is finished, you will be able to start querying. And you will also receive an invoice that you can use for expensing if necessary. You'll notice that the dashboard is now complete. Your subscription information, the amount available, queries allowed, queries remaining, because I haven't made any yet, your billing information, and ability to upgrade if you run out, or change your billing information, purchase what we call a top up plan. This will provide an additional 10% of the plan that you picked, the queries available, what you picked. So I now have 1,000 queries to use. And actually this will show up under subscription now. I am now going to navigate to the TN query. The query telephone number, disconnect date. On this screen, you can enter up to 50 telephone numbers with the consent date and company ID for the company you're querying. You can enter up to 50 using this blue button. My user is a caller agent, so there could be numerous clients in the drop down, so you just have to make sure that you pick the correct client's company ID. I'm going to use some telephone numbers that I know were reported as disconnected on May 9. I'm also going to use a phone number that was not reported as disconnected. We're going to expect that if the number has been disconnected on or after the date of consent, the result is going to be a yes, which means that number should not be contacted. And if the number has not been disconnected before the date of consent, I will expect a no. And a no result is what you want to receive, mean it hasn't been disconnected, mean it is fine, it is okay to contact that telephone number. So I will use this number, 850. And the date of consent, it's the date of consent that the caller received from the customer, or the last date that the caller was reasonably sure that the customer could be reached at that telephone number. So I'm going to use the date that is prior to the disconnect. And using the calendar, clicking search. This dialog box will always come up so the user can back out if they want. This is a billable transaction for which your company will be charged. Do you wish to continue? If you continue, that means that the query will be removed from the available amount, which can be viewed in the subscription dashboard afterwards. If I was uploading a file, a bulk file of up to 250,000 TNs, which I will show you in a moment, the amount of the TNs in that query will be removed once you continue with the query. So hit yes, and I will expect the results of a yes. So this means this number should not be contacted. And on this screen, this query telephone number disconnect, the results file, which are in CSV or XLS, they should be downloaded right away for the records in case you need to provide proof that the R&D was queried for purposes of safe harbor, and the results file will have date and timestamp because these results in this screen will not be stored once you navigate away. So I will try another number. I'll add the date of consent after the disconnect. And hit search, yes. And I received a no. That means the number was not disconnected, so it is fine to contact that customer. And then one more for the telephone number that was not reported to the R&D as disconnected. And as we'll make sure, as soon as the date of consent is on or after October 15, the result should be a no. And that's correct. So at this point, I will navigate to the query, bulk query upload. In this area, it's very easy. Just choose file. This is either a CSV or an XLSX. It's always going to be the same format, whether the user chooses to upload through the web or use the SFTP or use API calls or an API upload. From here, when the user uploads the file, it can contain up to 250,000 TNs. And the template, we have a template. It's a very simple template, telephone number, a consent date. There's an option to add a record ID. That template can be found directly on our website under resources and user guides. And once this is uploaded, once you choose your file and upload it, you'll be notified as soon as the results file is ready. Once the results file is ready, you can navigate to the downloads and download that file. It will appear as XLS or CSV. Again, similar to the TN query disconnect for the bulk uploads, the results files, they will be available for 45 days, but it's probably a good idea to download them in case the user does not come back. So there also are query summary report. If the caller agent has numerous clients, this is probably a good tool to use to see how many queries per a certain time period have been made that's needed for tracking. And I think at this point, I think this concludes the system demonstration for selecting a query subscription and conducting queries in the R&D. Thank you for joining us, and you're now ready to start connecting with confidence.
Thanks, that looks great. It's very helpful to see how to register for the R&D and use the database. Next, we have a short video from one of the beta testers talking about how they use the R&D.
Hi, I'm Stephen Kusick, the CEO of NRA Group, LLC. We are a debt collection agency with 3 principal locations in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, and Mount Laurel, New Jersey. We typically make up to 400,000 debt collection calls and texts daily. Our primary concern in the debt collection space is with dealing with a large number of wrong phone numbers from our clients' customers. The Reassigned Numbers database is a great help in identifying these old phone numbers in our system and helps protect us from TCPA liability.
Thanks
Hi,
again.
I'm Stephen Kusick, the CEO.
Thanks again to all of our beta testers, particularly those who participated in today's webinar. Now, Karen from the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau and Beth Sprague from the R&D Administrator will respond to some questions that we've received. It's not too late to submit a question to the R&D webinar at fcc.gov email box if you have not already done so. Karen?
Thanks, Patrick. Beth and I will read off the questions we received in advance, and then we'll see if any additional questions came in during today's event. Beth, let's start with you.
Thanks, Karen. So we got this question. The question is, what options does a subscriber have if they use all of their queries but need to make additional queries during their subscription term? So the answer to that is a subscriber has a few options in this situation. 1, they can purchase a new subscription. 2, they can subscribe to a higher tier by paying the difference in price. Or 3, they can top off, which means paying 10% of the subscription tier price, the caller will receive 10% more queries. We also received a question. The question is, what are the subscription terms? The answer to that is when a user subscribes to the R&D, they will choose a subscription start date, a subscription term, and a subscription tier. The subscription tier is the number of queries a subscriber can make during that term, during that subscription term. Right now, the R&D offers 3 subscription terms, either 1 month, 3 months, or 6 months. Over time, we anticipate offering a 1-year subscription term. When subscribing, callers can sign up for auto renewal, which we recommend to ensure continuous access to the R&D. And when subscribing, you'll also be able to choose a subscription start date, which is the date subscriber can begin to use the database and begin to query. And that is when the subscription term starts.
Another question is, you say that the R&D contains a complete data set, but that the number of telephone numbers in the R&D will continue to grow. Isn't that a contradiction? Can you explain what you mean? We're happy to explain that. When we talk about the data set being complete, what we mean is that all of the service providers are now required to report their telephone numbers that are permanently disconnected each month to the R&D administrator. Medium and large service providers began reporting that data to the administrator back in April, and small service providers began reporting a couple of weeks ago on October 15th. So now that all service providers are reporting their disconnected numbers to the R&D, the data set is complete. However, it will continue to grow. Beth?
And also, as of October 17, You've heard this number. The R&D has over 152 million telephone numbers. Service providers are required to submit newly disconnected numbers to us, to the administrator, on the 15th of every month. So the database will remain current and complete, but the number of disconnected TNs will continue to grow.
Someone asked, what do the different query results mean, and can I qualify for the safe harbor? So callers who query the R&D with a telephone number and a date of consent will receive one of three possible responses from the database. Yes means the telephone number has been permanently disconnected and potentially reassigned since that date of consent. No means the number has not been permanently disconnected since the date of consent, and no data in those instances when a caller queries the R&D with a date of consent before the R&D began tracking information, and the telephone number hasn't been reported as permanently disconnected since the database began tracking disconnected numbers. So callers that can demonstrate that they appropriately checked the most recent update of the database and that the database incorrectly reported no, not permanently disconnected when given the date of consent, either a date they could contact the consumer at that phone number or the date when they actually obtained consent, may qualify for the safe harbor. And we have a follow-up question of, is there anything I can do to get fewer no data responses? Because all service providers were not required to report their permanent disconnections until October 15th, 2021, queries with a date of consent prior to that date are more likely to receive a no data response. To increase the likelihood of a yes or a no response, we advise you to try to use a date of consent after October 15th, 2021. Remember that a response of no data is not eligible for the safe harbor.
And we also received a question, why is the R&D updated date important? This is a good question, and this date is actually very important, as you may not qualify for safe harbor protection if you haven't checked the most recent version of the R&D prior to making a call. Service providers are required to submit their permanent disconnect data to the R&D by the 15th of every month. The R&D is then updated with that information no later than the 17th. And the R&D updated date, which is found in the top right-hand corner of the database, will change to reflect the most recent update.
So if a caller queries the database on December 7th, for example, they should make note of the R&D updated date, which will most likely be November 17th. If they want to call a consumer on December 10th, having just checked the database on the 7th, a quick check of the R&D will tell them if the database has been updated since their last query. In this case, the most recent update would still have been on November 17th, so the query results they received on the 7th when they queried will still be accurate on December 10th. If, however, they want to make a call on December 21st, a check of the R&D will show that the database is updated on December 17th after their last query, which you remember was December 7th. So the December 10th query results will not be accurate, and the safe harbor could not apply unless they run another query. Another question about safe harbor is there a safe harbor if a caller scrubs its database on a periodic basis, such as weekly or monthly, in lieu of scrubbing the day each number is to be dialed? And yes, you can query numbers periodically, so long as the call you ultimately make to the consumer takes place before the database is updated again, at which point you would need to run a new query. As we just explained, the database is updated after the administrator receives data from the service providers on the 15th of each month. So you do have to check at least once a month, keeping in mind that when we're talking about once a month, the 17th is the day that the database refreshes.
And we got a question asking, what is the difference between a primary contact and a user? The answer is each company that registers with the R&D will designate a person as the primary contact. And that primary contact can then authorize people in their company to use the R&D, and they are considered users. We also got a question, how many telephone numbers can I query at one time? Do I have to manually input each telephone number? So the answer is you can manually input up to 50 telephone numbers to query in the R&D at one time manually. If you have a larger batch of numbers, more than 50 and up to 250,000, you can perform a query upload. The query user guide, which is located on our website at reassigned.us under resources and user guides, it provides a template for you to use to perform a bulk query. And we got this question, does my R&D user account maintain a record of my queries and the query results? The answer, this is an important question. The results of a caller's uploaded query file are only stored for 45 days, so they're not permanently saved. When the search results are finished, you'll receive a link to download your query results. It's your responsibility to download and save that information. The search results are not permanently stored. If the caller uses the TN query, the results are not stored at all, and they must be immediately downloaded.
And remember, in order to qualify for a safe harbor from TCPA liability, you must be able to prove that you queried the most recent version of the database and that the query result was no. So please remember to save the results of your queries. You'll need them for the safe harbor.
And we got a question, as I'm using the R&D, how can I ask questions or provide feedback to the administrator? You can contact the R&D administrator at support@reassigned.us by our toll-free number, which is 833-763-2366. Or you can go to the website and there's a feedback form right on the bottom of the website.
Someone asked if the R&D can be used for other purposes. So the Commission's 2018 Reassigned Numbers Database Order limits the use of the database to determining whether a number has been permanently disconnected since a date provided by the caller for the purposes of making lawful calls or sending lawful texts. However, the order noted that the Commission may address requests to access the database for other lawful purposes through its waiver process. Interested parties may contact Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau's Consumer Policy Division for more information. Ultimately, the answer is that you would need to request and receive a waiver from the agency before using the R&D for other purposes. And someone asks, why should I use the R&D? The R&D can benefit almost any organization that makes auto-dialed or pre-recorded calls by not only helping comply with the TCPA, potentially avoiding liability, but also ensuring they are getting important information to their intended call recipients. And the R&D can help any caller, whether or not their calls are subject to the TCPA, reduce the number of calls made to the wrong party or disconnected lines. During the 3-month beta test this summer, callers queried the R&D over 213 million times, and over 15 million potential nuisance calls may have been avoided. And where can I get more information about the R&D? The FCC has a webpage dedicated to the R&D. If you go to fcc.gov//reassigned numbers database, you can access links to various Commission documents, such as the Reassigned Numbers Database Order, which established the R&D, and various public notices that we've published about it. You'll also find current announcements about the database and links to the R&D website there.
And you can also go directly to the R&D website at reassigned.us, where you'll find instructions for registering and using the R&D, and links to all the documentation and tutorials.
So we had a few questions that came in while we were talking, quicker than we could get things onto slides. So let's address those now. We have a question that asks, hang on a second. Someone asked us if the slide presentation will be available during or after the meeting. And that's a great question. Yes, today's presentation will be preserved and available in approximately 2 days. If you'd like to view the slides, please email us at that same email where you sent the question, rndwebinar@fcc.gov, and we will provide you a link to access the information in our archives. Someone else asked, what does disconnected include? Does it include non-payment, suspended numbers ported to a new service provider? When would it become disconnected if it's not done intentionally by the user of the phone number? What actions or inactions deem it disconnected? Thanks for that question. Service providers are only required to report, and the database only includes those numbers that have been permanently disconnected. Permanent disconnection is defined in paragraph 38 of the Reassigned Numbers database order. It says a permanent disconnection occurs when the subscriber permanently has relinquished a number or the provider permanently has reversed its assignment of the number to the subscriber, such that the number has been disassociated with the subscriber for active service in the service provider's records. Permanent disconnected numbers, therefore, do not include instances where the phone number is still associated with the subscriber, such as when the subscriber's phone service has been disconnected temporarily for non-payment of a bill, or when a consumer ports a number to another provider. A ported number remains assigned to and associated with the same consumer, even though a different provider serves the consumer after the number is ported. And let me just see if there's anything else. Beth, someone asked, what time on the 17th of the month does the database get updated?
It's no later than 8 a.m. Eastern on the 17th.
Fantastic, thank you. All right, that concludes the Q&A portion of the webinar. Let's hear again from Patrick Weber, CGB Bureau Chief.
Thank you, Karen and Beth, and thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate your interest and terrific questions. And if you have any additional questions, we'll keep the email address rndwebinar@fcc.gov open for one more week following today's event. You can also contact the R&D administrator through the R&D website at www.reassign.us. if you have any questions about registering for or using the database. We hope you share our excitement and enthusiasm for today's launch of the R&D. In closing, I'd like to thank the members of the NANCY, particularly the Numbering Administration Oversight Working Group, for their work on the technical requirements for the R&D and for assisting in providing oversight of the contract. I'd also like to thank the administrator for their work on the program, and extend my thanks to the 130 beta testers who put the system through its paces prior to today's launch. And finally, I'd like to thank Chairwoman Rosenworcel, the commissioners, and their staff, along with the many FCC staff who have contributed to this program. Thank you all for coming. This concludes today's webinar.